From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Mike Apley will talk about a major project that the university has had a hand in, collecting and evaluating antibiotic use information in food animal production. Mike and his research team gathering direct information on how Kansas cattle feedlots employ antibiotics in their operational health management, and he'll explain the value of this effort. Then K-State's Sarah Lancaster will discuss several important principles in Herbicide Tank Mix Management. She'll tell us why that's even more topical these days. And further ahead, K-State's Charlie Lee on a new study of fish depredation at farm ponds by cormorants. All that and more next on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. It's good to have you aboard once again as we address a central theme of discussion in the livestock sector for sure in recent years, and that is the value and use of antibiotics in cattle health treatments. And Kansas State University has just been involved with a special effort with multiple collaborators trying to quantify antimicrobial use in livestock production. Spearheading this on the K-State end, veterinarian specializing in production medicine, Mike Apley. And Mike joins us now. So, Mike, you've been working with this topic for quite a while, of course. And what is this latest project that you have been involved with?
Well, Eric, this is the result of about 4 years of effort with collaboration with the Food and Drug Administration Center for Veterinary Medicine. They funded this project, and K-State also contributed to it. And we worked with 22 feed yards and 29 dairies on our end. Then there were other collaborators who worked with the swine industry and the turkey and chicken industry. So this is an international issue, obviously, and there's a group, very organized group in European Union that are doing this across those countries. The European view is fairly universally that it's about reduction. Wherever you are, reduce, and continued reduction is good. That's a lot longer conversation than we have time today on how that works and where you can get into actually causing issues and where it's good. It's really complicated. And here in the U.S., I can tell you that our group is about quantifying the antimicrobial use so that feedback can be given to the producer and veterinarian teams to look at their use in relation to others and also provide comparisons so they can say, well, we're using more. Why is that? Well, maybe we have a different class of animal or we have a different disease challenge. That's what our projects were about. And we're very, very grateful on our side here at K-State and collaborating with Dr. Sandra Godden at the University of Minnesota that we had 22 feed yards and 29 dairies that say, yeah, let's go. Here's our data. We'll help you. On the feedlot side, we had to go back and, we get ration data. Well, what were in those rations? So they'd help us do that.
What sorts of revealing discoveries, if you will, did you come up with out of this process? Because it was rather methodical and rather deep, it sounds, Mike. What kinds of things did you come up with out of this?
Well, so one of the first things we're very clear on is that these are not statistical samples of the industry. So to extrapolate from them to the entire industry would be inappropriate. Another thing that's very inappropriate with them is to compare between species, even though we may have similar metrics to say this use is worse or better than the other. The systems are so radically different. And what we found was in feedlots from our sample, we reported the data in two different metrics. We had a way to quantify the use. And we chose two different ways of doing that. One was total grams of drug by weight, and split out by different antimicrobial classes. And the other one was regimens, or the number of times an animal was treated. So if one of our listeners goes to the doctor with strep throat and they give them a dose of amoxicillin that day and you continue it for 10 more days, that's a regimen. That whole series of drugs you take associated with that disease is a regimen. Well, we counted the regimens, and they weren't calculated, they were counted. So we have actual data. So for example, in our feedlot data, over the 2 years, we had around 2.6% roughly of the annual fed heifer and steer slaughter. So 560 some thousand a year. We counted about 1.3 million regimens over those 2 years and quantified them by use category and by antimicrobial class. And what we found was that if you count milligrams, if you count weight of drug, which is problematic, but everyone's doing it, and many of the European countries are using that as their standard. But the problem with weight of the drug is that a dose of one class of drug might be 8 times the weight of the dose of another class of drug, yet they have similar effects. So the weight of the drug is really confounded by which drug it is. And so we do that because we needed to, and we compared it then with the regimens. And then the denominator is either animal year or time the animals could be exposed, or it's weight of live animals sold. And what we found is that if you look at regimens of drug, around 85% of our use in the feedlots is through the feed. And if you look at weight of drug, now we're up to about, in the low 90s, 93, 94%. So our in-feed uses dominate. We also had the use categories of when we give an injection to all the calves at arrival to control respiratory disease. That was a separate category. And then we also had the category of when an animal is identified with disease and then treated. So a very similar approach was taken in dairy, and those were expressed as regimens or weight of drug grams per cow year. And these are free to download from Zoonosis and Public Health. If you just Google it, you can go right there. And if you Google antibiotic use in animal agriculture, United States, Zoonosis Public Health, it should roll you there. There's a whole lot of calculations and everything like that. The big take home is we built these so that the good people who produce our animals and the veterinarians who also produce and work with them, hopefully eventually they can give us enough feedback that we keep working into something that's practical and that can be used to compare themselves with others and see what opportunities there are and define what the uses are.
So, Mike, this exercise has been conducted now, and you'll continue, obviously, to work on the data, the collection, the analysis. But at this point, can anything definitively be gleaned about antibiotic stewardship, the use of our various antibiotic products, and where we stand in as far as good stewardship practices?
Well, one of the things that's clear is that whether it's chickens, turkeys, pigs, dairy cows, or feedlot cattle, everyone who's using an antibiotic has a reason for why they're using it. And all those uses have a basis in either disease we anticipate from our experience with those types of animals in the production system, and that's our uses for prevention or control, or they have to do with uses for identifying and treating an individual animal who's ill. So there's two parts of that. One is the disease, and the other is the use of an antimicrobial to prevent, control, or treat that disease. What we find, in my opinion, is that it's all about the disease, and we utilize a whole lot of technology, vaccines, basic animal husbandry of environment and nutrition to control and prevent these diseases. So what what's going on is that those are being used for a reason, and we continue to evolve in ways that help to further remove the reasons for their use. And antibiotic stewardship's a whole lot more complicated than the number of regimens or the number of grams of drug you happen to use that year. It's about the disease incidence, which can be related to weather, it can be related to a myriad of things. So what we found was people have a reason for what they're using, and what happens for any type of reduction or alteration is focus on removing the reasons for those uses.
In conclusion here, do you hope that what you're discovering as you go along, in addition to what you've found so far, will lend to the, to put it this way, the possibility of preserving antibiotic use as it's needed in livestock production?
That's our hope. Our other hope is, personally, I think we will move into an era where we have farm level use monitoring eventually, if not for a legislative or regulatory reason, for a marketing reason. And our goal is that when that time comes, we will have hopefully contributed to metrics and a way of looking at it that serves the producer, that serves the veterinarian in using those drugs responsibly, rather than just coming up with some kind of number that the only response is you have to go down.
Well, thanks to you and your team for the rigorous work in this area that is critical to the livestock industries. Good luck in furthering these efforts, Mike. Thanks for telling us all about it today.
Thank you, and I hope everyone's staying safe.
Likewise. Mike Apley with us, veterinarian, Kansas State University. He specializes in production medicine. K-State and other entities involved with this sweeping project, sponsored by the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Veterinary Medicine, studying the trends in antibiotic use in livestock health management. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Agriculture Today continues now. Well, we're in the cropping off season, of course, but you crop producers can be thinking about your weed control programs and particularly getting that product to where it needs to be and allowing it to be effective in the field. That was part of the theme of a presentation that our guest recently made as she talked to certified crop advisors about making the most of herbicide tank mixes. Joining us once more, Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, tank mixes are a staple of weed control for producers, of course, Sarah, but there is room for error with those mixes if one is not careful about their practices.
Absolutely, Eric. So when we think about herbicide tank mixes, basically you can have one of three outcomes with a tank mix. Either everything can go as expected, so we call that an additive response, so 1 + 1 = 2. You can have antagonism, which would be 1 + 1 = 0. So that might be something like a physical antagonism where you have like sludge that forms in your tank. It might be a chemical antagonism where something about those two herbicides, something about herbicide A changes the way the plant responds to herbicide B, and you just don't get the control that you want. Or the third thing that can happen is something we call synergism. So that would be like 1 + 1 = 3. And so we actually use synergism a fair bit, especially when we think about using Group 27 herbicides. Listeners might be familiar with them as HPPD inhibiting herbicides or bleaching herbicides. So one of the examples of that would be Callisto mixed with atrazine. And so there's some recent research that validates that we can actually get better control of atrazine-resistant pigweeds when we use Callisto with atrazine. So even though the atrazine alone doesn't have much efficacy, it still improves activity of other products. So just because we have herbicide resistance doesn't mean that we should completely disregard that herbicide as being a useful tool in that particular system.
We've built up a considerable body of research on synergism of herbicides. Can producers reference what certain herbicides can do with others if they pinpoint a specific weed problem that they're having?
That's a really good question, Eric. There is a truckload of research on tank mixes and compatibility issues, but there are so many possibilities out there that there's really not, a compendium of tank mixes. Really the best thing to do when you're talking, basics of tank mixes is something we call a jar test. And that is basically taking the water source or the carrier source that you intend to use for your application and then mixing into that source in the order and in the ratio of your intended tank mix, all of your different products, shaking that up and then letting it set for 30 minutes or so and seeing what happens. Does some sort of particulate matter settle out? Does the mixture produce heat? So that will test for those types of differences. That jar test will not tell you, though, if there would be some sort of reduction in weed control due to changes within the plant.
Mm-hmm. That will be something that will be determined in field. It'll be determined through further experiences there.
And you're right, Eric. There is like I said, a good deal of research. And so, if listeners have questions, talk to your agent and they can route the question on to me about, do we have any data for a particular tank mix? There are some products that we tend to be more cautious about antagonism with certain products.
And in fact, you're talking up tank mixes with audiences here in the winter off-season for a reason, because there are some new options available to producers coming on?
Yeah, tank mixes were really on my mind, Eric, as I was prepping for this presentation last week, because, dicamba seems like always in the news these days. But a lot of the new restrictions have to do with various tank mix components when you use dicamba. And so, what I've been really trying to emphasize is the importance of the volatility reduction agents in herbicide sprays that include dicamba.
That's going to be a requirement for those dicamba applications come springtime, 21.
That's right. So when we got those 3 new labels this fall for XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Tavium, one of those additions to the label was this volatility reduction agent. And so EPA says that has to go in with every application of those 3 products, whether they're, independent or whether they're as part of a tank mix. And so basically what those volatility reduction agents are, Eric, is it's just a pH buffer. So when we think about these herbicides, a lot of herbicides that are translocated in the plant are actually weak acid herbicides. And so what that means is they have one of the little building blocks of that molecule is a hydrogen molecule that can fall off or be attached depending on the pH of the environment. And so these pH buffers are just trying to keep that dicamba molecule, we use the term associated or in the salt form, right? We talk about the dicamba DGA, diglycolamine, in XtendiMax. So we're trying to keep that DGA attached to that dicamba molecule so that it doesn't fall off and then get replaced with that hydrogen molecule and become the free acid. And that free acid of dicamba is what we worry about most with volatility and movement. That's what vaporizes and moves off target. But yeah, pH of the tank mix is really a critical factor there. There's been a lot of research. For example, some folks out of Tennessee have done work looking at what happens when you add different products into the tank mixture. And it turns out that a lot of these glyphosate formulations really do drop the pH in the tank mixture. And so having this buffer in there before you put the glyphosate in will help to keep the pH of the solution correct so that when you add your dicamba, everything goes as planned.
But back to something you brought up earlier, Sarah, and that is the order of mixing your products. You're discussing that at length with producers and others.
Yeah, so mixing order makes a big difference. So back in the dark ages when I was an undergrad, we learned something called the Wales mixing order. And basically it just said wetables or any of those dry formulations go in and get agitated and mixed up. And then you do your liquid formulations. And then you use emulsifiable concentrates. So things like Dual is the classic example of an EC formulation. And then you put your surfactants in last. But when we think about tank mixing order for XtendiMax and Ingenia, but the labels are pretty ambiguous on this one, Eric. So they all contain a caveat that talks about referring to, quote, all product labels. And so while there are some generalities in play, it's going to be a little bit tricky, I think, for growers to really parse out for their particular tank mixture what exactly is that mixing order when we're talking about dicamba systems. So yeah, the XtendiMax and Ingenia label are pretty vague, but I also pulled a label for one of the more popular drift reduction agents, which DRAs were required for applications in 2020. This particular DRA that I looked at did a good job of spelling out when different products should be added, including this particular drift reduction agent. So I would just really recommend that growers find the most informative list of tank mixes and kind of go with that.
Really, that is what it comes down to. Producers need to study up on this as best they can. This would be a great time, of course, during the off-season for them to do some homework.
Yeah, so one of the catches with that, though, Eric, is that, all of the dicamba product labels say the same thing about checking the product website for lists of approved tank mixes. Okay, so that tells you what you can put in the tank with this product that theoretically will not change the potential for drift. The other thing I want to say about the importance of checking those product websites is that when you read the fine print on the labels for XtendiMax and Ingenia, it actually says that you are bound to what's on that website within 7 days of your application. So if you check on Tuesday, you need to check again before you make the same application the next Tuesday, just to kind of make sure that nothing has changed or that you're still kosher. Now, the big rub with this is that last I checked, those websites are still not live. So I have not been able to get any indication of a specific timeline for when to expect those websites to go live. Obviously, the field folks that I talk to for the companies are just as anxious as I am to have those available. But I'm sure they're dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's and to make sure that those are right before they go up.
Well, again, Sarah, this is something that they should re-examine if they haven't thought much about their tank mixes and just how important it is to be meticulous about their management. Great topic to kick around. We'll likely do so as we approach springtime once again and talk about some specifics once more.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize as growers think about what they're doing and get into making these applications to communicate with your extension personnel and with company personnel, because the possibilities for combinations are almost endless. And as a researcher, it's kind of difficult to anticipate all of the combinations that growers might use. And so, as we get feedback from folks out in the countryside, that can be helpful to us to target the research programs to where they need to go.
Very well. Thanks. We always appreciate your input.
Thanks, Eric.
Sarah Lancaster with us. Sarah is a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and on now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Chick-fil-A is alleging that Tyson Foods and other poultry companies conspired to raise the price of chicken, causing damage to the restaurant's business. This in a lawsuit filed in federal court on Friday. Also named in the lawsuit, Pilgrim's Pride, Sanderson Farms, and Purdue Farms, among other poultry producers. The new lawsuit said, quoting here, a number of defendants communicated via phone and text message in order to share and coordinate confidential bidding and pricing information in connection with Chick-fil-A's request for bids on broiler chicken meat. The lawsuit said Chick-fil-A has purchased billions of dollars of broilers from the defendants throughout the relevant period at prices that were artificially inflated, as the lawsuit reads. Chick-fil-A asked the court for a jury trial and is requesting the awarding of damages. Now, when contacted by DTN, a spokesperson for Purdue Farms responded they believe the claims are unfounded and plan to contest the merits. A spokesperson for Sanderson Farms told DTN that company does not comment on pending litigation. And Tyson and Pilgrim's Pride did not respond to DTN's request for comment. Back in July of this year, Boston Market filed a federal lawsuit in the same court against the same group of poultry companies. That lawsuit alleges that the companies conspired to manipulate the price of broilers from 2008 to 2017, costing Boston Market hundreds of millions of dollars, they say, in overcharges. The new fiscal year is getting off to a flying start for U.S. agricultural export sales, according to numbers from the USDA. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
Some analysts were a little bit surprised at the big agricultural export numbers, very strong numbers. It came in for September at just over $12 billion.
And October is only above and beyond what that was.
Economist Bart Kenner tracks trade for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The numbers are in for October. Total ag exports, not 12 billion, not 13, not 14, but
15.1 billion.
That's a 23% increase from September's strong showing, and it's about the same increase from October a year ago. And Kenner says
the last time we saw a number that strong was November of 2013.
Wow, so this is a fast start to the new fiscal year, and of course, as Bart says,
it's a lot easier to have a solid year total number if your first month of the fiscal year is a solid number.
And it certainly was that, and indeed, USDA is forecasting ag exports this fiscal year to top last year by 12%. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Two USDA programs recently announced funding for projects designed to improve our nation's livestock biosecurity. The USDA's Rod Bain has the story.
Building up U.S. livestock biosecurity efforts is behind funding awards within two USDA programs.
National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Program, National Animal Health Laboratory Network.
Both funded under the 2018 Farm Bill, according to Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs Greg Ibaugh. A total of $14.4 million is awarded by the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to 76 projects featuring state, land-grant university, and industry private partners. The National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Awards.
Different projects that range from important focuses like livestock biosecurity, large animal depopulation, and also state-specific issues.
While National Animal Health Lab Network funding is awarded to projects designed to improve
our ability for early detection of high-consequence animal disease and also improve emergency response capabilities.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Now for you dairy producers, the weekly feature from the Animal Sciences and Industry Department here at K-State called Milk Lines. Awaiting, as always, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to address our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the season of giving. You know, it's been a pretty difficult year as a dairy industry. We've struggled with economics, and then we struggled with COVID, and there's been lots of challenges. And here recently, we've struggled with the negative PPDs, and there was an election. So, you know, there's social distancing that we've been trying to maintain, and we're really tired of Zoom meetings and working through our business operation through distance types of things. But this might leave you feeling like the Grinch. But I want you to think about a few things. Let's just take a deep breath. We actually have a lot to be thankful for. And as dairymen, one of the things that should be close to the top of our list would be our employees. I'm not sure what things look like on your dairy this year as we approach the holidays, but for most, in the past at least, there's been some significant social gatherings that involve our employees and generally their families and different types of celebrations. And I realize this may not be happening this year, but I wanted to have you think about something. It's still important that you show appreciation to your employees at this time of year and also their families. So how are you going to do that? Obviously, gifts are still possible, even though we may not pass them out at the party that we might have held. But maybe we should think about a little different twist to our holiday giving. Rather than a group celebration, maybe we should consider a gift card to a local restaurant or maybe even the grocery store for each of the families involved in our operation. Now, rather than just getting a generic gift card down at the local box store, maybe one of the things you ought to think about is actually go to that local business and work with the manager or the owner of that business. This creates something that develops a tie between your farm, your dairy, and the local businesses. It's important to give encouragement to everyone during these times. You know, in our dairy industry, we often recognize that for every dollar we generate on the dairy, it circulates in our local community about 7 times. This might be an opportunity for us to help our local businesses understand just how that actually works by doing something this way. So, if you do it this way, you've created a tie between your dairy and a local business. You've also provided a gift card or some sort of certificate that will be used at that business, and that money will continue to then circulate within your community. I've mentioned that you could do this for a restaurant or a grocery store, but, this also works at the hardware store or the farm supply store or maybe even a local gas station. So this year, as you consider gifts for your employees, think about how you might involve local businesses directly in your holiday giving. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Many thanks, Mike. K-State's Charlie Lee will be in shortly for a look at one migratory bird's negative impact on farm pond fish resources here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, a visit with former wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. He's in each week to take a look at another topic under the heading of wildlife management. Charlie, you've information today about a particular bird species which does tend to feed aggressively at aquatic facilities, ponds and otherwise, the cormorant. And tell us about its nature before we talk about this study that was conducted.
Well, double-crested cormorants are a species that feeds on small fish. They are a species that have the potential to be a significant predation factor on many farm ponds that are used for food fish. Oftentimes that's on catfish, but they also prey on whatever species is available within that pond. Kansas has as many as 400,000 people that are purchasing fishing licenses. Some of that use takes place on Kansas farm ponds. We don't have a good number of the number of Kansas farm ponds we have. We know that the numbers are increasing at a slow rate, particularly since the 1940s and 1950s when most of those farm ponds that are across the countryside were being put in. But those people that are just putting in farm ponds and would potentially have a problem with double-crested cormorants have the potential to have a pond that's set up with a very poor population structure if those cormorants have their way early on. Most cormorants are going to be feeding on fish that are less than 6 inches in length. And one study showed that 16 cormorants per day that was feeding on about a 12-acre pond over the winter can result in a 22% decrease in the biomass on that aquaculture facility when those fish were harvested.
That's a lot of damage by a relatively few number of birds.
Yeah, and to put it down in even simpler terms, it says that one cormorant would need about 1 pound of fish per day. Now, when you look at the weight of a 6-ounce channel cat, you can see very quickly that they can eat quite a few of those fish in a day to get that necessary energetic component of their diet.
It can be a quite serious problem. What about this newest study? You say it's out of the state of Mississippi, and it looked at techniques for reducing this predation?
Well, the research was used to try to evaluate past years of impacts on cormorant populations. So basically they were wanting to look at the numbers of cormorants that were present on aquaculture facilities when the depredation order was high and the aquaculture producers could take unlimited numbers of cormorants. And then when the depredation order was basically stopped and you had to get a permit to do the depredation, and now a somewhat blended approach. And what they had found is that as they look at these facilities, the birds spend time on private waters, and other times they're on natural water bodies. Most people are not concerned when they're on natural water bodies because that's what the double-crested cormorant has to do to make a living. They've got to consume some fish. If they're fish that are taking funds directly out of someone's pocket, then that perhaps puts it in a little bit more of a crisis situation. And it was a time for a good review of the impact that these birds can have on aquaculture facilities and what some of the past control programs have done to the population.
So what were the general results of this study in those respects?
Well, when they looked at it, they found that the proportional use of aquaculture ponds compared to natural water bodies by cormorants was lowest during October through January, and that's when most of the cormorants are in the south part of the United States. But it steadily increases through April, which indicates there's a distribution shift towards aquaculture in those months immediately prior to their migration when they move north. Oftentimes, here in Kansas, I got the complaints about cormorants in May and early June on their way north. And it takes them a little while, but it seems these migration flights is when you get the highest number of birds on the water body, and they're usually for a short period of time. But if you've got a flock of 25 to 50 cormorants that are on your pond for a week, each eating a pound a day, you can see that they can very quickly alter the composition of the fish species that you have placed in your pond. Then they found that the highest proportional use of aquaculture by cormorants occurred in 2016 when lethal control measures were not allowed against cormorants. The least proportion of cormorants on aquaculture was in 2015 when cormorants could be lethally controlled under the authority of the aquaculture depredation order. So that trend kind of highlights the potential influence of mortality risk, and I think there's also some spillover there when you try to evaluate the techniques that are used, which are oftentimes frightening techniques. When those frightening techniques are reinforced with some lethal reduction of birds, it seems to be there's some more staying power, and the birds are easier to frighten away, perhaps moving further north or at least to other ponds where they may be tolerated, or they move on out of the area altogether.
So is that the recommendation here? Those means might be something of an answer to the cormorant feeding issue if one does have a pond that's contending with that?
Well, I think first and foremost, if one is having a problem with cormorants, you make sure that you're following the rules that say, yes, this is a protected migratory bird. If you're going to take lethal controls, you need to get permission in order to do that. I think that it is important that the federal agencies involved here have taken the time to evaluate populations and economic loss through the situation and realize that perhaps this very strict depredation by permit only was not very successful and have been willing to make some changes.
This capsulized some of the issues with cormorants, again, feeding at ponds or other aquatic resources and the damage that they can inflict on fish populations there. So an interesting read, Charlie, for sure. Thank you for coming over and telling us about this. Longtime research and extension wildlife specialist, Charlie Lee there. Well, once again, our time is away. We appreciate you listening in. Please rejoin us right here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.